All right, let's dive into a fascinating electoral puzzle out of Bihar, India. On the surface, it looks like a huge victory for women's participation in democracy. But when you dig just a little deeper, the story gets way more complicated and, honestly, it reveals a pretty serious flaw in the system. So, let's start with this number. In Bihar's recent assembly elections, women didn't just turn out to vote, they outnumbered men at the polls by over 434,000. I mean, that sounds amazing, right? A massive win for democratic engagement. But here's the twist. That incredible turnout happened even though there were nearly 4.2 million fewer women even registered to vote in the first place. Wait, what? How on earth do you get more voters from a much smaller group? It doesn't seem to add up. And that is the central question here. How is this even possible? To solve this mystery, we've got to follow two main clues before we uncover a much deeper, more fundamental problem with the numbers themselves. Okay, let's get into our first clue. And funnily enough, to understand why so many women showed up, we have to start by looking at the men who couldn't. It's a simple demographic fact. Bihar has one of the highest rates of male outmigration in all of India. We're talking millions of men who are registered to vote in Bihar, but they actually live and work in other states. So come election day, they're just not physically there to cast a ballot. This alone starts to explain how women's votes could end up outnumbering the men's.
All right, now for clue number 2. This one is less about demographics and a lot more about a very deliberate political strategy.
You see, for almost 2 decades, the government in power has really focused on women's empowerment. And then, right before this election, they rolled out a new scheme, transferring 10,000 rupees directly into women's bank accounts. This was a huge, last-minute incentive to vote. And get this, the payments kept going even after the official campaign rules kicked in.
So you've got missing men and targeted cash for women. That explains the high turnout, right? Well, yeah, it does explain why the women who were registered showed up in such big numbers. But it does not explain that massive gap of 4.2 million women who were missing from the voter lists to begin with. And that, right there, is where the real problem is.
So now, we need to shift our focus away from the voters and take a hard look at the voter lists themselves. Because just before the election, something pretty dramatic happened to those lists.
It's a process called the Special Intensive Revision, or SIR. Officially, it's just the Election Commission cleaning up the voter rolls. You know, adding new folks, deleting others who moved. It's supposed to make the lists more accurate. But in Bihar, well, it had a very different effect.
Instead of just a routine update, this revision process led to a huge, and frankly, a pretty questionable shift. Women were getting removed from the voter rolls at a way higher rate than men were.
Just look at the impact this had. Before this revision, the gender ratio on the voter rolls was 907 women for every 1,000 men. Afterwards, it plummeted to 892. That is a massive drop, and it's clear proof that way more women were taken off the lists than men.
So who were these women getting removed? Well, analysis suggests it was mostly young women, especially those between 18 and 29 who moved after getting married. They were taken off their parents' home voter lists, but the big problem is there's absolutely no transparency about whether they were ever successfully added to the voter rolls in their new homes. They might have just vanished from the system.
So what this leaves us with are two totally conflicting stories, happening at exactly the same time. One of them looks like a huge success, and the other looks like a systemic failure. On the one hand, you've got the good news. High participation. More women are fired up and exercising their right to vote, which is fantastic. But on the other hand, you have the really bad news. Flawed inclusion. The very foundation of the election, the voter list itself, seems to be fundamentally unfair and skewed against women.
And you know, what's most troubling here is the complete silence from officials. The Election Commission of India, the very body that ran this revision, has offered zero transparent answers for why Bihar's voter lists suddenly became so lopsided against women.
Which leaves us with this final critical question. We absolutely should celebrate the fact that more women are voting. But can we really call it a true success when the registration system itself is leaving millions of them behind? Participation is only truly meaningful when it's built on a foundation of fair and inclusive registration. Without that, it's just a qualified success.